When there's nothing left but the fire in my chest and the air that fills my lungs, I'll hold my tears and
Welcome to Iron Rhetoric with your intrepid host, Pastor Brett McAtee. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways the future, and behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own.
Hello, this is Pastor Brett McAtee. You can call me Dominee if you want. That's an old Dutch tradition. They used to call their pastors Dominee, which means Lord or Master. So yeah, if you want to call me Dominee McAtee, even though I'm not Dutch, I could go with that. Or if, we've often toyed with the idea of, in order to be Dutch, I could change my name to Vanity instead of McAtee. And some would say, that fits perfect. So anyway, hello, this is Iron Inc., and as I said, this is Pastor Brett McAtee, and it's good to have you aboard for this podcast. Today we're looking at, going to be looking at a couple issues, but I want to start off by saying we're on the cusp of our 100th podcast, and in light of the 100th podcast, we're opening our listeners to the idea that perhaps they'd like to write in to request what the 100th podcast should be. So if you write your recommendations or your questions to believingtheologist@gmail.com, saying something like, hey, I know Dominee McAtee knows everything about everything, so maybe he could speak about this issue, and then you could just list the issue that you want. And if it's not an issue I want to talk about, I'll pretend that I never saw it. If it is an issue I want to talk about, then I'll take it up and I'll look at it. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the issue that's on everybody's lips these days, it seems. At least if you follow other podcasters, it's on everybody's lips, and that's the whole issue of Israel and what they call affectionately the JQ, the Jewish question. It's been on everybody's lips because of the interview that was done between Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes, and then it was responded to at a political convention of Republicans and Jews, I think is the convention. And Mark Levin and Randy Fine, Randy Fine, by the way, is a U.S. congressman from Florida, Republican, who's Jewish. Mark Levin is a radio talk host who had a position in the Reagan administration. And also Ben Shapiro weighed in as well. And there's a bit of a civil war going on right now within the MAGA movement over this particular issue. A lot of people are saying the MAGA is going to split apart over this issue of support or not supporting Israel. And this circles around not just what's happening in the West Bank and Gaza, more specifically Gaza, with the ridiculous bloodletting that's gone on there. But this goes back decades. This goes back actually all the way to 1948. There have always been people that have tried to raise this issue, and they've always been largely silenced. Gatekeepers have shut them down. For example, Bill Buckley, who I had really little use for, was a gatekeeper, and he shut down this issue by ostracizing Joe Sobran for raising the issue, ostracizing Sam Francis when Sam Francis raised the issue. Early on, Buckley got rid of the Birchers, and it was not a little bit surrounding this particular issue. And so this issue has been present for some time, but it seems to be getting oxygen more and more recently, and people are coming out of the woodwork. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about that. I thought I'd give my own personal history of how I was red-pilled on this issue some time ago, and then I thought that I'd give you an insight into a conversation I had that touched on this issue with somebody who is bagel in their genetics. And I use the word bagel for Jew because Jew is one of those lightning terms that if you use it, you can get struck by lightning. You take my meaning. So I use the word bagel. It seems to make people laugh, and it navigates around the flinch reaction that comes with the word Jew. It reminds me of a Nixon meeting I read about once where they had a meeting and they were talking about potential recession, and they didn't like the word so much. They didn't want the word to be used that they started in their meeting. They decided, well, okay, instead of saying recession, we're just going to say banana. So they sat around the table talking about the potentials of recession. Every time they wanted to use the word recession, they'd say the word banana because it made everybody feel better than using the actual word recession. So that's what we're doing with the word Jew here. We're just using the word bagel because for some reason the word Jew triggers people and it sets them off. So a little bit about my past on this issue. I got red-pilled on this 20-25 years ago. I knew it was an issue before then, but I wasn't aware. I'm like the average American. I grew up in a average American Christian, I should say. I grew up in a dispensational setting, although the dispensationalism wasn't pushed as hard as I know it would have been on a lot of other people, but still, it was part of the warp and woof of my life. For example, every year in my youth group, they used to load us up in a bus and they'd drive us, 24, 25 miles over to the county fair at Centerville, Michigan. And they would do that because every year they'd have Jack Van Impe and Roxella Van Impe would be there. And, of course, Jack was a heavy dispensationalist. And so that's just one example of how dispensationalism was part of my background. But again, I wasn't exposed to it as much as a lot of other people. I really got red-pilled on this issue back in I guess it would have been the mid-'90s. When I was an undergrad, I had a professor who made a huge difference in my life. His name was Dr. Glenn Martin. Dr. Glenn Martin, he did not talk about this issue. He would have known it was academic suicide back then. But he had a friend named Tom Rose who taught at Grove City College. And Grove City College was, once upon a time at least, I don't think it's this way much anymore, but it was seen as being a pretty conservative university institution. Now, in the past few years, they've had critical race theory and wokeness controversies going on there. But when I was in college in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, it was considered pretty conservative. And one of their teachers was Dr. Thomas Gordon Rose. And sometime back, I wrote to Dr. Rose asking him for a list of books because I knew that he had been friends with Dr. Martin, and I thought, well, it might be good to get some recommendations from him, particularly on good economics, because that's what he taught. He was an economics professor. And so he wrote back a very generous letter. And I'll read a bit of that letter that he wrote back to me. He said, "Dear Reverend McAtee, it was good to hear from you. Yes, Dr. Glenn Martin invited me to lecture at your university twice. The first time while you were there, and the second time not long before he died. I loved Glenn as a dear brother in Christ and respected him as an excellent scholar." Tom says, Dr. Rose says, "We never discussed the Jewish question, and I doubt that he would have had the freedom to bring it up in his classes because of the politically correct view against open discussion of the influence of Jewish Zionism in America." And then he says, "Which is no doubt the very most important issue that needs to be discussed if we're to reverse the strong trend to destroy the American Republic and meld us into the New World Order." So even back then, he was aware of the New World Order, and he says the issue of bagel Zionism was, he says, the most important issue, the very most important issue that needs to be discussed. Now, understand, I did not expect this at all. I asked for a list of books. I had no idea that he was going to pivot like this and say, you want to know what the very most important question is? It's the Jewish question. And again, this is, I said it was the late 90s, but it looks like it was 2008 when this correspondence happened. Dr. Rose went on to say, "I've spent many, many hours, days, weeks, and years researching the modern Zionist bagel movement." He says, which was financed by the Rothschilds in the late 1890s and who also financed the Scofield Bible and his work in producing the Scofield Reference Bible, as well as the establishment of the Federal Reserve Bank here in these United States, and the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, and the murder of the Tsar and his family in 1918, all historical facts which are purposely hidden from the textbooks and histories. I know that you're most likely branding me as an anti-Semite, he writes to me. I wasn't, by the way. But that is not true. Such a verbal missile is only used as a means of shutting off discussing important issues that need to be discussed for the sake of God's people, that is, believers in Christ who are the light of the world. So even at this point in time, he understands that the bomb anti-Semite is thrown around in order to shut people down, in order to not discuss what needs to be discussed. Notice again how he also mentioned the fact that he'd put in hours, weeks, and months, he says. Did he say months or years here? He says hours, days, weeks, and years researching. Right? And again, notice what he puts on their plates. He puts the Scofield Reference Bible. And by the way, Joseph Canfield is the chap who wrote the Scofield, wrote a book exposing just exactly what Rose gets at here. The Incredible Mr. Scofield and his Bible, or that's the title, or something like that. And it's a good work to reinforce what Dr. Rose says here, that the Bagels were behind financing the Scofield Bible. And why would they do that? Well, because in the end, what the Scofield Bible does is it restores the Bagels to being God's chosen people. And who doesn't want to be known as God's chosen people? And so it was a brilliant piece of propaganda to fund that Scofield Bible. Here I'm in danger of getting off on a bunny trail because I'm beginning to remember facts from the book that I read. But again, I am convinced, along with Dr. Rose, that the Bagels were part of the financial support of C.I. Scofield, who was no scholar himself. Actually, he was quite a wretched dude in terms of ethics and behavior. He comes out of nowhere. He's got no pedigree, and all of a sudden he's writing notes for a Bible that end up getting published by a Jewish-owned publishing house.
For the listeners, in the description below, you will find a link to a PDF of the Incredible Scofield and his Bible, the book, from archive.org. Check it out. Do your own research.
Yes, that's a good piece of advice. Do your own research. Rose did his research, and then when he wrote me, I started doing my research, and now I rest among the large troop of those who are constantly called anti-Semite. But my response to that is, when I'm accused of that, I just kind of look blankly and say, well, you say that like it's a bad thing. Same response I give to being called a racist as well. So anyway, it's interesting what Rose is now just 6 years away from passing away. He's in the twilight years of his life. Here I am. I'm a young man compared to him, asking for his counsel and advice on what to be reading. And this is the counsel that he sends back to me. He goes on to say, my suggestion, Brett, if I may use first names, is that for you to read the following books in somewhat of the order in which I list them, in order to familiarize yourself with this important issue if you're not already familiar. Let me begin by stating that there are absolutely no relations between Old Testament Judeans or Israelites and the people who call themselves Jews. He writes, again, this is Dr. Tom Rose, a respected scholar. He writes, Jesus was not a Jew. And by the way, if you want to look up on a resource on that, you look up by Dr. John Weaver. It might be just John Weaver. You look this up on YouTube. John Weaver, Jesus was not a Jew. And he spends, I don't know, somewhere I think 8 to 10 minutes explaining from the scriptures why it's not accurate to call Jesus a Jew. It's really quite interesting. So, and I discovered that after I got this letter from Rose. He says Jesus was not a Jew, and modern so-called Jews have no linear descent from Old Testament Israelites. And this is true, by the way. It's a little known fact that Israel's made it next to impossible, not impossible, but next to impossible for people to do DNA testing who live in Israel. Now, you have to ask yourself, why? Why would they make it next to impossible to do DNA testing? And the obvious answer that presents itself is because they don't want people to find out that they're not really connected to the Hebrews or the Israelis of the Old Testament era. That's all a grift. It's all a con. And Dr. Rose is the first one that brought that to my attention. Rose went on to write, quote, "The biggest center of so-called Jews today is New York City, and they are descendants of Khazar pagans who have the roots in the area between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. Their king chose a form of Babylonian Talmudism, that is Judaism, about 740 A.D. He says that this is all explained by Arthur Koestler, a Jewish scholar, in his book, The 13th Tribe. And that's another book I would recommend if you want to get into this. He mentions then next Benjamin Friedman has written a number of pamphlets and made audio tapes on the Zionist movement, seduced these United States of America into World War I and into World War II. Friedman is now dead, but you can find his work via search engine on the internet. And I think that's about a 2-hour lecture, and I would recommend that as well. You can find that online. Benjamin Friedman, I don't know what you would use for the search engine, but it's out there, so you shouldn't have a hard time doing it. Maybe Benjamin Friedman, Jews, World War I, or something like that. And so what Rose did then is he proceeded to give me a list of books that I needed to read, which indeed I have read. I think all of them, if not all of them, nearly all of them. But then I've read several others besides that he didn't have listed, because once you go down this wormhole, I got to tell you, it changes everything. It changes your understanding and view of reality, and you begin to realize as you ferret this out and as you read more, you begin to realize how much you've been lied to during your life by different sources. The media, which again, because they're largely owned by bagel interests. The state, that is the U.S. state, the federal government, and they're largely co-opted by bagel interests and have been since, well, before 1948. Some would say as far back as Woodrow Wilson, and maybe even before. So anyway, looking into the subject can change your whole worldview, can change your whole understanding, and you begin to put black hats on different people than you had before and white hats on different people than you had before. But here is the list. I'll run through the list quickly here in case the listeners want to be serious about this. And Matt could probably cut and paste this list and put it into the notes of the show.
I most certainly can. Just be warned, there's going to be a long description this episode.
The first is by a chap named Ivor Benson, and is titled The Zionist Factor. This is a primer. It's an overview book. Rose said it was the best starting point to get a quick but an accurate overall view. Then there's Douglas Reed, The Controversy of Zion. Stan Rittenhouse. Now this one is I think it's might be a little bit harder to find. It's called For Fear of the Jews. Henry Ford, The International Jew. Tom says it's a much ridiculed book, but very accurate and good. Now, what's interesting about this volume is that once upon a time when Ford sold his Model A or Model T, I don't know which one it was, when he sold his cars, whenever he'd sell a car, he would throw in the 3-volume set of The International Jew. You can find that in a Reader's Digest version. You can also find some pretty good podcasts that go over Ford's work on the International Jew. Now, he later in life repudiated his views on the Jews, but many people believe that, and I'm one of them, that he was put into a financial vice, and in order to get out of that vice, he had to repudiate what he had written. There's a chap named Al Fry. That's a pen name, F-R-Y. Waters Flowing Eastward, The War Against the Kingship of Christ. Dr. Rose says it provides an accurate account and listing of the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, a must read. I did read that one. That one was really impactful when you begin to realize what the goal of all this is. Andrew Carrington Hitchcock, which you can find, Mr. Hitchcock does a steady podcast with Peter Hammond. But he wrote a book called The Synagogue of Satan, The Secret History of Jewish World Domination. A very important year-by-year outline of key events of the Rothschild dynasty, quite enlightening. We've already mentioned Canfield's book. He's got this listed here. Alfred Littlenthal, The Zionist Connection. To What Price? Peace. That's one I don't think I did read. I don't think I read that one. Tex Mars, Project Lucid. Dr. John Coleman, One World Order, Socialist Dictatorship, and 2 other books by the same author, an Englishman who had access to secret books in the British Museum. John W. DeCamp, The Franklin Cover-Up. Now, I haven't read all of that one, but I've read large portions of it. Dr. Rose says, The True Report of the Homosexual Pedophile Ring in Washington, D.C., Nebraska, and other cities in these United States of America, and more. Disgusting, disturbing, but a must-read. That book was instrumental in helping me to see just how disgusting and dirty Washington, D.C. is and the politics therein. Because of that book, I had no problem believing the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing, which just came down the pike. To be honest, my operating assumption with politicians is that they're all perverts of one degree or another. I tend to think that they couldn't get to the positions that they're at, whether congressman or senator or executive or justice of the Supreme Court. They couldn't get to that position without being compromised. He also says he has an article on Etherzone called Can This Be Treason? Dealing with a threat to our country of the homosexual ring in D.C. and the Bush White House. And again, he'll connect the dots between that and the bagels. And then he mentions Debbie Kidd's website, sweetliberty.org. I don't know that that's operating anymore. I did read some of the material that was there, though. An article entitled Jewish Persecution. Another must-read also on the same site, The Greatest Hoax, Epilogue, The 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And then he signed off with his well wishes. The reason I found this so significant, I think I've already said, was that this guy was no, guy wearing a tinfoil hat, right? That's the phrase. This was a guy who was well respected. This was a guy who taught economics. He rubbed shoulders with some other pretty well-known economists as well who were considered conservative, and yet here he is recommending that, look, if you want to understand reality, you need to understand what's going on in with these books. Another book that, and I'm going to lose the title, and maybe we can insert it later, but there's another book out there that was written in the context of the Second Vatican Council by an author with an assumed name. That's why I have a hard time remembering it. But what this book does is it traces the history of the relationship of Christianity and Jews throughout the centuries, and the pronouncements at different times that the Christian church made regarding the Jews at certain councils and gatherings. And that book was eye-opening to me, that in as much as that it made me aware that this issue of the Jews is not something that's just a recent phenomenon, that the Christian church has had problems with the bagels for centuries. And then, of course, we all know about Luther's book on the bagels. Calvin has a book, a smaller book than what Luther did, called, I think it's A Certain Conversation with a Jew. But again, Calvin is every bit as vitriolic as Luther is in his work on the bagels. And of course, when you come to believe this, when you come to see the reality of this, you will be charged with anti-Semitism. You'll also begin to realize that there's a relationship between the bagels and minorities. It is true that the bagels use minorities as a club to hit the white man with, particularly the white Christian. And you begin to realize that there's a project going on here, and that project is to roll Jesus Christ off of his throne and to diminish Christianity and to diminish those who are the carriers by God's grace alone, who have been the primary carriers of civilizational Christianity, and that is the white European. Again, it's not because there's anything special in and of the white European's person. God in his sovereign grace decided to call them, and he would use them as those who would carry the gospel all over. He would use the white European to create Christendom. He would use the white European to take Christianity to Africa and to China and the whole missionary movement. And so the attack on the white man that we find in things like the replacement theory is merely a proxy war for the war to roll Christ off his throne. And that's why I get so adamant about this particular issue, because I see through the proxy war to what really the end goal and design is. And the end goal and design is to strip Christ of his ascendancy, to strip Christ of his kingship and of his dominion. And it's also styled to do that in order to make Christians, white Christians, feel guilty about their history. And so I do think we need to be more epistemologically self-conscious when it comes to this particular issue. And I think when we're not epistemologically self-conscious, we're in trouble. And this is part of the problem with the church today, because the church today, still by and large, thinks that the bagel is God's chosen people. They still think that somehow we need to bless Israel, wrongly interpreting Genesis chapter 12, as Ted Cruz did in the interview with Tucker Carlson. Israel of God is no longer Israel. God divorced Israel in AD 70. In the cursing of the fig tree, let no fruit ever be produced of you again. That was a parable to say that Israel would never produce fruit again. And so Israel is not the land of Israel in the Middle East is not Holy Land anymore. The whole earth is God's, right? And Christians shall inherit the earth. And so we need to get past this idea that somehow bagels are special to God. And I don't have time to get into this now. It's another podcast. But the idea that somehow bagels are going to get saved, are all going to get saved, and then Christ is going to come back is just a faulty interpretation of Romans chapter 11. But again, I haven't got time to get into that now. Now that I've opened the door, I suppose I need to at some future point. So again, I would say the church isn't going to be of any use in the battle that we're currently in until it gets this particular issue right. And it's a long, long way from getting this particular issue right. I have the freedom to say some of these things because I'm no longer in a denomination. But if a person is in a denomination who's saying the kind of things that I'm saying now, I'm pretty confident that they'd be given the left foot of fellowship. But more pastors need to step up to the plate. There are a few out there. There's that chap in Montana. What's his name? He was in Florida. He moved out to Montana. He's not Reformed. He's a Baptist. I can't think of his name right now. You might know who he is already. So he's very good on the subject. And there are other chaps out there that are good as well. Of course, the danger here is to go too far to an extreme and become a hater in terms of, I can't stand any Jew. That's just stupid. Of course, there are those who are of Hebrew descent that are brothers in Christ. There are those who are Khazar descent who are brothers in Christ, and they need to be warmly greeted and owned and embraced. But if we're going to talk in generalities, and generalities is a thing that exists, right? Then we have to say, generally speaking, we have a problem with bagels, and we have had a problem with bagels in this country for decades and decades. So I'm going to pick this up again, and either it'll be part of this podcast or another podcast. But I thank you for listening and at least considering this subject. Maybe you want to get some of those books that Dr. Rose recommended and start probing for yourself on this matter. I find that most people who get outraged over this are completely clueless. They haven't read one word on the subject. And so they're knee-jerking in their response because they've been so propagandized. We've all been propagandized on this subject. But if you do the reading, you get into the background of this, you begin to see there's a problem. There's a problem, and we're probably not going to be right until that problem is addressed. All right, Godspeed. Thank you for listening, and good day, good night, good afternoon, good morning.
Brothers, can you hear my voice, or am I all alone? If there's no fire to guide my way, then I will start my own.
Thank you for joining us today. Look for us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube Music. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, like, and share.